What started as a US-Israeli military operation against Iran has become a naval mobilization unlike anything the world has seen since the Cold War. Within 5 days of Operation Epic Fury beginning on February 28th, warships from the United States, Britain, France, Greece and potentially Italy are either already in position or actively sailing toward the eastern Mediterranean and the Gulf region. Each nation has a different reason for being there. Each deployment carries its own consequences, and the combined effect of all of them together is reshaping the strategic map of the Middle East in real time. Start with the United States because its deployment set the conditions for everything that followed. As far back as January 23rd, Trump announced publicly that a massive armada was heading to the Middle East. That armada included 2 aircraft carrier strike groups, the USS Abraham Lincoln, already in the Persian Gulf when strikes began, and the USS Gerald R. Ford, which crossed the Atlantic through the Mediterranean and arrived in theatre as Operation Epic Fury launched. 2 carrier strike groups operating simultaneously in the same theatre means approximately 150 aircraft, dozens of precision strike capable warships and multiple fast attack submarines operating in coordinated formations. The US currently has 9 guided missile destroyers deployed in the Arabian Sea alone, plus 3 littoral combat ships forward deployed at Bahrain. The scale of American naval presence in the region is the largest since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. By Wednesday, Hegseth confirmed more forces are still arriving. The reason for America's deployment is stated and obvious: it is conducting the war. But the reason other nations are now moving their own warships into the region is more complex, more legally fraught, and more consequential for the long-term shape of this conflict. Britain deployed the Royal Navy Type 45 destroyer HMS Dragon, along with 2 Wildcat helicopters equipped with air defence missiles, to the eastern Mediterranean. Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed the deployment publicly. The stated mission is defensive, protecting Cyprus, where Britain maintains 2 sovereign military bases at Akrotiri and Dhekelia. Those bases have been directly threatened by Iran since the conflict began, and a drone struck Akrotiri in the conflict's opening days, causing minor damage. Starmer also confirmed publicly that the US can use British bases for operational strikes on Iran. RAF F-35s have already had their combat debut defending Cypriot and Jordanian airspace against Iranian drones. Britain is the closest any NATO member has come to direct military participation in this conflict on the offensive side. The HMS Dragon deployment is framed as defensive. The base sharing arrangement for US offensive operations makes that framing incomplete. France's deployment is the most significant of any European nation and the most consequential in terms of raw military capability. President Emmanuel Macron announced on French television the deployment of the aircraft carrier FS Charles de Gaulle, its full escort group and its embarked air wing to the eastern Mediterranean. He also deployed the frigate Languedoc off the coast of Cyprus. Macron stated France was sending additional air defence assets as well. French Rafale fighters have already been deployed to protect French facilities and personnel in the UAE, which has absorbed the heaviest Iranian missile and drone attacks of any Gulf state. The Charles de Gaulle is France's only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and its premier power projection asset. Its presence in the eastern Mediterranean, alongside the 2 US carrier groups, creates a 3-carrier formation that has not been assembled in that region in recent history. Macron framed the deployment as protective and in support of allies. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi responded directly, warning that any military involvement by European nations, including purely defensive actions, would be considered an act of war. France has not walked back its deployment. Greece deployed its newest warship, the French-built FDY frigate Kimon, to the eastern Mediterranean on March 3rd, specifically to protect Cyprus from Iranian strikes. Greece's deployment is both an alliance obligation and a geographic necessity. Cyprus sits within the range of Iranian ballistic missiles, and Greece has strong political and cultural ties to the island's security architecture. The Kimon is also a signal of European solidarity with the US-led coalition at a moment when several other European governments are publicly criticizing the legality of the war. Italy is actively deliberating. In an emergency meeting in Rome, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and senior Italian officials discussed deploying the destroyer Caio Duilio, which has air defense capabilities extending up to 350 kilometers, to join the European naval presence in the region. No final decision had been confirmed at the time of this report, but the deliberation itself reflects the pressure every NATO-adjacent European government is feeling. Iran has explicitly warned that defensive military involvement by European nations constitutes an act of war, and every European government now has to decide whether it believes that threat and how much weight to give it. South Korea, while not deploying warships, is watching this situation with acute economic anxiety. South Korea is the world's 8th largest energy importer, with the vast majority of its oil transiting through the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf region. Its main stock index fell 12% in a single day, the largest single-day drop on record, amid fears about what a prolonged Hormuz closure means for its energy supply chains. Japan and India face the same structural vulnerability. Asia receives approximately 70% of the oil that transits Hormuz. None of those countries can afford a prolonged disruption, which is why every major Asian economy is watching the naval mobilization in the Eastern Mediterranean with a combination of alarm and helplessness. Now, here is the strategic picture that all of these individual deployments add up to when you assess them together. The Eastern Mediterranean and the Gulf region now contain the combined naval forces of the United States, Britain, France and Greece, with Italy potentially joining. That is 4 NATO members, 3 of them nuclear powers, with their warships converging on the same theatre as a conflict that Iran's foreign minister has explicitly said will treat European defensive military action as an act of war. The line between defensive and offensive action in an active shooting war is not a clean one. French Rafales defending UAE airspace are operating in the same skies as US aircraft conducting offensive strikes on Iran. British bases are being used by US aircraft to strike Iranian territory. Greek frigates are protecting Cyprus, where British and American military infrastructure is active. The operational entanglement between defensive and offensive action is already present. The legal and political distinction between them is becoming harder to maintain with each passing day. The consequences of this naval mobilization extend in multiple directions simultaneously. For the Strait of Hormuz, the US deployment of escort vessels and the Trump administration's political risk insurance announcement are designed to reopen commercial shipping. Traffic through the strait was down 81% on the first Sunday of the conflict, compared to the previous week. Getting it back to functional requires not just military presence but insurance markets to re-engage. And those markets will not re-engage until the threat picture changes materially. For the conflict itself, the arrival of the Charles de Gaulle and additional US forces signals a sustained campaign, not a short one. For Iran, the convergence of multiple NATO-adjacent naval forces in waters surrounding its operational theatre removes any remaining ambiguity about the international alignment of this conflict. For the rest of the world, the mobilization of 4 European navies within 5 days of a war starting, regardless of the defensive framing, represents the fastest and most extensive European naval response to a Middle Eastern conflict in the post-Cold War era. Spain has taken the opposite position. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez barred the United States from using Spanish military bases for operations against Iran. Trump responded by threatening to suspend all trade with Spain. That threat is being watched across Europe as a signal of what Washington expects from its allies in this conflict. Not neutrality, but alignment. The gap between Spain's position and Britain's and France's positions shows a European alliance that is not unified on this war and is unlikely to become unified quickly.